Amelia moved through the office like a whisper, soft enough that no one ever truly noticed her presence. She was always the first to arrive, slipping in with the dawn light, hair still damp from the morning rain or mist, clutching a second-hand laptop bag and a paper cup of coffee she'd brewed at home. By the time the others shuffled in with their laughter, perfumes, and stories of late-night dinners, she was already at her desk, typing quietly, pretending the buzz of her coworkers didn't sting as much as it did. Her role in the company was small, junior assistant in the marketing department, but Amelia never complained. She typed reports, carried stacks of documents, fetched forgotten coffee orders, and stayed late to polish presentations that would be signed off by people who barely remembered her name. It wasn't that she lacked ambition, it was that life had taught her ambition often belonged to people with a safety net. And Amelia had none. In her bag, tucked carefully between old receipts and a lunchbox with reheated leftovers, she carried a little leather-bound diary. It was the only luxury she'd ever allowed herself, bought years ago from a thrift store when she was still in college. The corners were scuffed, and the once vivid cover had dulled, but inside, the pages breathed her world. Every heartbreak, every small victory, every quiet dream she dared not voice found a home there. At work, she wore her mask well. She smiled politely when spoken to, nodded in meetings, and never betrayed the exhaustion that weighed down her bones. But when she opened her diary at night, the truth spilled out. She wrote about the loneliness of eating dinner alone in her tiny apartment, the dread of bills piling up on her kitchen table, the ache in her chest when she thought of her mother's fading health. Yet scattered among those worries were softer notes, the dreams she still carried, the poetry of her soul that refused to be extinguished. One entry, written after a particularly brutal day, read, "Today they laughed at me when I spilled coffee. I smiled and apologized, as always. But when I came home, I sat on the floor and cried. Not because of the coffee, but because sometimes I feel like I don't belong anywhere. Still, tomorrow I'll try again. I always do." The diary was her secret refuge. No one knew about it, not her coworkers, not her neighbors, not even the few friends she'd drifted apart from. It was her only confidant in a world that felt deaf to her voice. That was why, when she realized she had lost it, panic struck her like ice water poured down her spine. It happened on a Thursday evening. The rain had come suddenly, hammering against the office windows as thunder rolled in the distance. The day had been chaotic, the kind of day where every department scrambled to meet last-minute deadlines, and Amelia had stayed late once again, printing copies and checking details no one else bothered to notice. By the time she gathered her things, her head was spinning with fatigue. She clutched her bag, rushed through the lobby, and hurried to the bus stop, not noticing that the diary she had set on her desk while packing had been left behind. The next morning, her heart sank the moment she reached for it in her bag. It wasn't there. She searched every pocket, every corner, even checked under her desk. Gone. The panic rose so quickly she felt lightheaded. She wanted to scream, to beg the office to stop and help her find it, but she couldn't. How could she explain? She would have to admit that she carried something so private, so vulnerable, in a world where vulnerability was mocked as weakness. So she said nothing. She sat at her desk, hands trembling slightly, pretending to work while her mind spiraled into dread. Meanwhile, several floors above her, Ethan Sterling sat in his office. The CEO of Sterling Enterprises, he was a man who inspired whispers wherever he went. Tall, impeccably dressed, with the kind of confidence that filled a room, Ethan was both admired and feared by his employees. To most, he was untouchable, a man who lived in a world of glass towers and boardroom victories, far removed from the struggles of ordinary people. That morning, among the stack of folders placed on his desk, there was something out of place. A small, leather-bound book, its cover faded, a pressed flower peeking out from between the pages. Ethan frowned, picking it up. It didn't belong in his world of profit charts and contracts. He intended to pass it to his assistant to send down to the lost and found. But curiosity tugged at him. He flipped it open, expecting perhaps an agenda or a notebook filled with dull meeting notes. Instead, his eyes fell on delicate handwriting, words that flowed like whispered confessions. He told himself he would glance just long enough to find a name. Yet line after line pulled him in deeper. He read about skipped lunches, about sitting quietly while coworkers forgot her name, about taking pride in tiny accomplishments no one else noticed. He read about the loneliness of carrying burdens too heavy for one pair of shoulders. The words weren't bitter, they were tender, honest, vulnerable in a way he rarely saw in his world of guarded faces and ruthless ambition. And as he read, something shifted inside him. Ethan had been born into privilege. His father had built the company, and though Ethan had worked hard to grow it further, he had never known the kind of desperation that inked itself onto those fragile pages. He had never worried about an empty fridge, never felt the sting of being invisible in a room full of people. Yet here, in his hands, was a window into a life so starkly different from his own. He turned page after page, feeling a weight press into his chest, a quiet guilt he couldn't name. And then, at the very end, he saw the last line, written in a faint hand as though the writer had hesitated before finishing. If only Mr. Sterling knew how much I admire him, not for his wealth, but because he has the power to change lives. I just wish mine was worth noticing. Ethan froze. His breath caught, and he stared at the words as though they had been carved into him. The letters blurred for a moment, but not because of the ink. He didn't know who she was, not yet. But in that instant, he knew that the diary he held was not just a misplaced notebook. It was a cry he had never been meant to hear. For the rest of the morning, Ethan could not focus. The diary sat on the corner of his desk like a fragile secret, its presence louder than the stream of phone calls and the endless chatter of executives who came in and out of his office. He tried to return to his spreadsheets, to answer emails, to review contracts, but his mind kept drifting back to the words written in that careful, aching hand. He had been admired plenty of times before, praised in the press, envied by competitors, flattered by business partners. But never like this, never with such quiet honesty. Her admiration was not for the suits he wore, the empire he commanded, or the power he wielded. It was for something she had seen in him, some potential for goodness that he wasn't even sure he lived up to. That last line echoed in his thoughts. I just wish mine was worth noticing. The words gnawed at him. In the silence of his office, he wondered how many people worked in his company and felt unseen, unheard, like faceless cogs in the great machine he ruled over. He had always prided himself on being fair, on rewarding hard work. But was fairness enough? Was he blind to the quiet struggles happening in the very hallways he walked every day? By noon, he could stand it no longer. He pressed the intercom button. Sophie, he said to his assistant, can you find out who this belongs to? She entered a few minutes later, adjusting her glasses as she held the diary delicately. There's no name inside, sir. Just handwriting. Should I circulate a notice? Ethan thought for a moment. A notice would embarrass the owner. It would expose her diary to whispers, even if it was returned unopened. No, this was something he had to handle differently. Not yet, he said. Leave it with me. For the rest of the day, he found himself watching people differently. When he passed through the marketing department, he let his gaze linger on the junior staff, the ones who sat quietly at the edges of the room. He tried to imagine which one had written those words. Who was she? Which pair of eyes carried that quiet sorrow? And then he noticed her. Amelia sat at her desk, typing steadily, her shoulders slightly hunched, her expression calm but distant. She didn't laugh when others laughed. She didn't try to catch anyone's attention. She simply worked, blending into the background so seamlessly that most people would have walked past without a second thought. But to Ethan, armed with the knowledge of the diary, she no longer seemed invisible. She seemed luminous in her quiet endurance. Something in him tightened. He knew it was hers. He didn't know how, but he was certain. That evening, after most of the office had cleared out, Ethan waited until the floor was nearly empty. He stepped into the marketing department, his polished shoes silent on the carpet. Amelia was still there, as he suspected, her desk lamp casting a soft glow over her papers. She startled when she saw him. No one expected the CEO to appear unannounced, especially not in the cubicle rows of the lower floors. She scrambled to her feet, nearly knocking over her pen. Mr. Sterling, she stammered. Amelia, isn't it? His voice was gentle, stripped of the authority it usually carried. She nodded quickly, unsure if she was in trouble. Her pulse raced as she tried to remember if she had made any mistakes that day. He reached into his coat and placed the diary on her desk. The sight of it made Amelia's breath catch. Her world collapsed into silence. Her fingers trembled as she touched the cover, relief and terror mingling in equal measure. Where did you? It ended up in my office, Ethan said quietly. I wasn't sure whose it was at first. He paused, studying her face. I read it. The color drained from Amelia's cheeks. She felt exposed, as though every layer of her carefully guarded dignity had been stripped away. You read it. Her voice cracked, almost a whisper. I didn't mean to invade your privacy, Ethan said. His tone was sincere, almost pained. At first, I opened it only to find the owner. But then, he hesitated, struggling for words. The truth in your words stopped me. And I couldn't look away. Her eyes burned, humiliation washing over her in waves. I'm sorry. I never meant for anyone to see that. Especially not you. There's nothing to apologize for, he said quickly. Amelia, you wrote about things I should have noticed long ago. About the way people in this company feel invisible. About struggles I have never experienced, but should have understood. She shook her head, gripping the diary tightly against her chest as though shielding it from further intrusion. It was just me venting. It doesn't mean anything. It means everything, Ethan said firmly. He took a small step closer, his eyes locked on hers. That last line, I just wish mine was worth noticing. Amelia, your life is worth noticing. More than you realize. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She wanted to believe him, but years of being overlooked, dismissed, and forgotten had taught her otherwise. You don't have to say that, she whispered. I'm not saying it because I have to, Ethan replied. I'm saying it because I want to. Because you opened my eyes. For a long moment, the office was silent, broken only by the soft hum of the lights above them. Amelia stood frozen, diary pressed to her chest, unsure whether to run or stay. And Ethan, powerful, untouchable Ethan, stood before her not as a CEO, but as a man who had just discovered something precious in the unlikeliest place. Finally, he spoke again, his voice softer now. I want to do something for you. Not out of pity, but because you've reminded me what this company should stand for. You've reminded me what I should stand for. Tell me what you need, Amelia. Tell me how I can make things better. Her throat tightened. She had imagined 1,000 conversations in which someone finally saw her, but now that it was happening, the words refused to come. She shook her head slowly. I don't need anything, she murmured. I just wanted to matter, even if only in my own thoughts. You do matter, Ethan said, his gaze unwavering. You matter more than you know. And I want to prove it to you. In that moment, Amelia realized the power of her own words. She had never intended for him to see them, but somehow they had bridged the impossible distance between their worlds. And though fear still curled in her chest, a fragile warmth began to spread there too, like the first light of dawn breaking through a long night. She didn't know what would happen next. Neither did he, but as she stood there with her diary clutched to her heart and Ethan Sterling's eyes locked on hers, she understood one thing. For the first time, someone powerful, someone untouchable, had truly seen her. And that was the beginning of everything.